You see, a lot of people don't understand life. You'll see even in video games and cartoons, there are people who are trying to subtly, and perhaps not so subtly as well, explain to you that criminals run society. And as you see in the case of Lex Luthor, for example, in Superman, he's not necessarily a supervillain. In fact, he's not. He's a rich person with access to a lot of technology. So, it's pretty much based on reality. Now let's look at this for a second. We live in a criminal society where organized criminals tend to come out on top. People with less than honest and less than noble aims basically get their way with politicians and with the rest of the country. And we go into wars that we shouldn't fight. We make policies we shouldn't have because of a bunch of ignominious, lowly, unscrupulous, godless people. So what you see with the worst criminal society, the organized crime, the various organized crime factions, there's a myriad of the different forms of organized crime, the myriad of organized criminals. Okay? What do you see with this? Well, you see them diversify. Say it with me. Diversify their capital or their money, their blood money. Now ask yourselves, what kind of educated people would help a bunch of criminals invest and launder their blood money? What kind of unscrupulous, immoral, dishonorable, honorless fools, heartless, ruthless, quote-unquote scholars and experts would help these evil people, to blend into society, to invest in various sectors of society, especially the pharmaceutical sector, because it's the most profitable. But we'll try not to talk about that in this video. Well, it goes back to spiritual bottom feeders, right? A devout Christian wouldn't do that. A truly devout Muslim would not do that. They simply would not. So whether you believe it is happening by design, as I do, or it is just the natural tendency in certain systems such as crony capitalism, bankism, if you will, as Max Kaiser, for example, has called it, what you see is that criminals run the whole show. And there are people who aren't necessarily as ruthless, who aren't necessarily as extreme as they are, but they are helping them. Think about all the businesses that the mafia owns. For example, the Italian mafia, the Commission, the Five Families. They owned restaurants, garbage disposals, city services, and so on and so forth. Okay? Now think about all the people they killed. They owned construction companies because typically they would have mass graves and then put a building on top of it, right? They were extremists. The criminals behind society are extremists. And on record, they have hired Satanists to do hits for them. Or at least people who go through the motions of being Satanists, or who have joined openly satanic groups such as the Aryan Brotherhood, doing hits for La Cosa Nostra, on record. So there are Satanists everywhere, and there are criminals everywhere, and they collaborate because in the so-called criminal underworld, there isn't too many types of people for them to turn to. They can only turn to those who are willing to work with them. Someone such as myself, for example, is not willing to work with them. So Satanists are everywhere and criminals are everywhere. And you'll find that in many institutions they downplay the amount of criminals that are in their institutions and groups and entities. But they almost always acknowledge that they exist. They'll say that we have our bad apples, or that the same amount of criminals that there are in society, there, exist in the police department, and so on and so forth. So ask yourself, well, if these secret societies, for example, the Masons, aren't so bad, then how did they rise to riches in a ruthless dog-eat-dog system, such as crony capitalism? They must have collaborated with criminals. They must be materialistic. And a lot of people say, well, they did charity. How many, typically the mafia gives money to the church. Does that automatically mean that they are a benevolent group? Of course not. Of course not. So I hope this kind of puts things into perspective for you. That when you have criminal groups that diversify, that means they're collaborating with different businesses, they're the investors, and different people have opened their arms to them and said, you know what, we know who you are, we know you're a criminal, we're not going to play with your money, and we are glad that you chose to do business with us. The Yakuza, for example, is organized crime that is basically accepted as a legitimate business group in the eyes of the Japanese government. Okay, so what I think is amazing to me, it's just crazy. It's hard to come to terms with it. That I find myself having to convince people that criminals run society, and that to be extra successful in a society such as this pretty much is the same as being a criminal. When you set up a system like a Babylonian system or a satanic system, the worst demons and the worst devils become the worst criminals, and they are the most successful people. Now, of course, there are exceptions to the rules. There's always exceptions, okay? I know there's a lot of rich people who don't like what I'm saying. There's not much I can do about that. I'm going to tell the truth. And it's very sad that, I have to explain it like this, but it needs to be said. Yeah, I kind of, in a way, I kind of feel bad because I know there's some people who don't see themselves that way. And a lot of times in life, if you don't reflect as much as I do, for example, you don't really see what you've become. If you don't meditate on what you're doing and always ask yourself, are you any better than the satanic scum, for example? And that leads me to my last point, but I'll get there in a second. If you don't do that, then perhaps you don't see what you've become, and you say, hey, just because I'm rich doesn't mean I'm a bad person. And then you get real offensive, but you don't look inside yourself. So when these people see me talk in a very sophisticated manner, how can they then say that there's something wrong with me, or, that I'm wrong? And you're starting to see the trolls move away from that, and now they've started with another angle where they say, no one cares what you have to say. So first they tried to say that I'm crazy and try to set me up to go to the psych ward. Now they've kind of backtracked and say, you know what, we need to try something else, which is basically proving my point pretty much beyond any doubt. Damn near. Because you know them by their works. You know what they're trying to do by their works. You could ask the military about that. How do they prepare themselves, when they're holding down a base, or they're holding down their lines or their side? They start observing what the enemy's doing, and then they start trying to figure out what they're doing. Trying to intercept communications, trying to spy on them, see the movement of weapons and troops and so on. What they're, what they're doing gives away what they're trying to do, if that makes sense. So it brings me to my last point. Some people might say, well, why are you so hard on the spiritual bottom feeders? Let's not forget, all the horrible things that they have done. All the spiritual bottom feeders not only are doing horrible things to society, which is the main reason I began to call them out on YouTube alone in 2009, but pretty much for about 2 decades now. But they have also gone out of their way to make videos that have thousands of views about me, single me out, try to provoke me to go to, try to get me to go to the psych ward. They say, provoke this person because we're trying to get him into the psych ward. And in the video, I was in a rush. I was waiting for days, and that's why I put the text in the other video. I'll put the link in the comments where I say, I do like a minute and a half interview real quick with the person who first reported that she was approached on the internet. Basically, they communicated to her via the internet that they wanted, they asked about me and wanted her to help them to provoke me, so that I ended up getting involuntarily detained in the psych ward. Involuntary hold with me, in the psych ward. Involuntarily institutionalized in the psych ward. So basically, I was in a rush, so I kind of said, were you told to provoke me to go to the psych ward, or something like that. The words were kind of tricky, but I think we all understand why I said it like that, and I think we all understand what I was saying, and I think we all understand that she understood. But anyway, and of course, when you put it in context with the rest of that short interview, you can tell obviously she understood what I was saying. So there's no question about that, not even the slightest. So when you look at these things, right? Why don't I want to be friends with spiritual bottom feeders? Oh, and that was one more thing, I forgot. There's one more thing I want to talk about too. Okay, I don't want to be friends with them because they are destroying society. They are destroying individuals. They are destroying groups of people. And black people have it the worst. And so whatever people have it the worst, whether I'm that race or not, I'm going to stick up for them. I'm going to be very disgusted at people preying on people who have it the worst. If they were Chinese, for example, I would still be very upset. I'd say, look, these people have it hard. For example, I have this Palestinian flag. Perfect example, right? I have a Palestinian flag. You might be able to see it a little bit. You can't really, on my wall right here. And on my car, and I have Palestinian boxing gloves on my rear view mirror. Okay, and I have Palestinian placard, not flag, but, on the license plate. So again, these people have it hard. And so I say, I stick up for them, even though I'm not Palestinian. I say, well, why are you picking on them? Why are you making it worse for them? So basically, I put the study in another video, and I know I'm going over time, right now. I put a study where it showed that 80% of prisoners come from single-parent households. So I'm like, look, one of the major problems facing the black community, who pretty much take the brunt of the New World Order, I've said it many times, I may as well say it again, 6 million sub-Saharan Africans die annually from infectious diseases alone. And that's only 62% of the mortality rate, I believe. So, so for these people to attack the family structure. Now, let me tell you how homosexuality attacks the family. We all know that feminists attack the family. They want to quote-unquote liberate women. Some of them are satanic feminists who see Lucifer as the liberator of women. Okay, we all know that they're attacking the traditional household and trying to redefine things into ways quote-unquote more equal, which is not really more equal. Most at a time, we'll have to make it a part 2 or attach this all together. So basically with gays, right, there's something called conditional homosexuality. I'm gonna make this argument from their point of view. They're wrong, but their point of view is basically, there's some things that overlap, okay? The idea that there's some group of people, of gay people who are there by choice or because the psychological preconditions existed for them to end up at the point that they're in, whether it was being in prison, whether living in San Francisco, being molested as a child. Well, I'm almost out of time, so I'm gonna go to the next clip now. It only lets me upload 15 minutes at a time, that's why. Okay, so going back to, how gays break down the family structure. Well, first of all, they are promoting homosexuality no matter how you look at it, okay? A lot of people struggle with this idea. For the same reason a pimp recruits prostitutes. And he kind of looks around and says, what kind of female can I, can I prey on? It's the same thing with gays. A lot of people don't want to see it this way. But this is how it is, I promise you. They do a lot of times it's with little boys. That's why gays are disproportionately pedophiles, and they've gone through great lengths to try to cover that up. But all the most valid studies show that beyond any doubt, that they are disproportionately pedophiles. I'm not saying all gay people are pedophiles, but we'll get to that. Okay, there's different groups of people have different problems, and there's reasons for that. And if you look at them in the most humane way and say we're all people, and people have different problems based on what type of person they are, they're more prone to certain types of misbehavior. Okay, but anyway, they basically recruit little boys in many cases. You hear about the gay priests, right, who rape altar boys and so on. What you don't hear about is the other side of the story. Is not all those altar boys reported to the police. Some of them grow up to be the gay lover of their mentor. Some of them find another guy their age after they outgrow their gay, some of them like it. And there's a lot, a lot of things people don't know. There's a lot more rape like that than people think there is. There's people who don't report it because they like it. Okay? I know it's disgusting, but, it has to be said. All right. So, basically, gays have no problem creating the preconditions for conditional, quote-unquote, homosexuals to exist. Conditional meaning, under the right conditions, they're gay, otherwise they would have been straight. Now, obviously, two gay men, two lesbian women can't have a child. And of course, they're coming up with this artificial insemination, but that's destroying the traditional family structure and trying to replace it with something sick and twisted. I don't want to go on and on about that, but I am completely against that. But and that right now is something in the future. We can kind of put that aside and say we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. We'll address that argument. In a way, it needs to be addressed, but it's not as important as what's going on right now, in a lot of ways. Okay, which is that it's attacking the family structure. You see a lot of black abortions, a lot of black people dying from violence and hypertension and problems that are more likely to, they're more often found in black communities than other communities, for instance. So they must be addressed, especially because these are the most victimized people in the entire fucking world. Black people in general. So, basically, gays have teamed up with feminists on the left. You might call them libtards, leftists, whatever. Democrats. And so they're attacking the family structure by helping the feminists who are openly attacking the family structure. Then they are kind of sneak attacking it themselves by turning out, quote unquote, or trying to influence people to be gay. All right? For the same reason when you have a crush on a woman, say you're a guy, right? You have a crush on a woman. You're trying to win her over. Oh, don't think for 1 second
that gays don't try to win straight men over. They do it all the time. And not all rapes of little kids are reported. Some little kids like it and it fucks with their head, and they end up being quote-unquote conditional homosexuals later in life.
So I'm out of memory on my phone, so make a long story short, the spiritual bottom feeders work together to break down the family structure. That's why I'm not nice to them. That's why, I even started to make a video where I was being nicer to them and trying to apologize to any of them who might be less bad, but I decided no. They're my enemies. They're the enemies of humanity. You don't see them speaking out against those of them who are doing this. So what do you call that? Why aren't they speaking out against those of them who are doing this? Why are gays trying to cover up that they're disproportionately pedophiles instead of speaking out against gays who do this? Why aren't any of these people, speaking out against people breaking down the family? Obviously, they don't have a problem with it. Obviously, they're okay with it. Obviously, their self-interests are more important than the interests of all of humanity. How dare they call themselves humanists? Diversify. Say it with me. Diversify their capital or their money, their blood money. Now ask yourselves, what kind of educated people would help a bunch of criminals invest and launder their blood money? What kind of unscrupulous, immoral, dishonorable, honorless fools, heartless, ruthless, quote unquote, scholars and experts would help these evil people, to blend into society, to invest in various sectors of society, especially the pharmaceutical sector, because it's the most profitable. But we'll try not to talk about that in this video. Well, it goes back to spiritual bottom feeders, right? A devout Christian wouldn't do that. A truly devout Muslim would not do that. They simply would not. So whether you believe it is happening by design, as I do, or it is just the natural tendency in certain systems such as crony capitalism, bankism, if you will, as Max Kaiser, for example, has called it, what you see is that criminals run the whole show. And there are people who aren't necessarily as ruthless, who aren't necessarily as extreme as they are, but they are helping them. Think about all the businesses that the mafia owns. For example, the Italian mafia, the Commission, the Five Families. They owned restaurants, garbage disposals, city services, and so on and so forth. Okay? Now think about all the people they killed. They owned construction companies, because typically they would have mass graves and then put a building on top of it, right? They were extremists. The criminals behind society are extremists. And people with less than honest and less than noble aims basically get their way with politicians and with the rest of the country. And we go into wars that we shouldn't fight. We make policies we shouldn't have because of a bunch of ignominious, lowly, unscrupulous, godless people. So what you see with the worst criminal society, the organized crime, the various organized crime factions, there's a myriad of the different forms of organized crime, the myriad of organized criminals. Okay? What do you see with this? Well, you see them divert. You see a lot of people don't understand life. You'll see even in video games and cartoons, there are people who are trying to subtly, and perhaps not so subtly as well, explain to you that criminals run society. And as you see in the case of Lex Luthor, for example, in Superman, he's not necessarily a supervillain. In fact, he's not. He's a rich person with access to a lot of technology. So, it's pretty much based on reality. Now let's look at this for a second. We live in a criminal society where organized criminals tend to come out on top.